In a vast, empty field, a confused knight called Diaz wonders if he's getting pranked. Over a month ago, he had returned home from a successful victory in war. As a reward, the king of his nation granted him a large domain of his own to live in and manage. Now, Diaz realizes that he got scammed since the king basically kicked him out of the capital to live in a giant patch of empty land. With no further instructions from the king, Diaz thinks he's free, so he wanders around the field searching for food and other resources. After a short while, he comes across a clear stream and enjoys the refreshing water from it. Then, he continues to search the land until it's night. Having found no food or resources, he lies down to rest, thinking that he'll leave the domain if the entire region is empty. The next morning, an Oni girl called Alna interrupts his sleep, kicking him and demanding to know what he's doing in her land. Diaz gets confused since there was nobody around him the other day. She doesn't care about his confusion and keeps interrogating him to learn his origins. Diaz tells her that he's literally homeless, so the girl gets skeptical of him. She asks him what he was doing in her land anyway, so he truthfully explains that he was sent by someone to live there. He then tells her that his only current goal is to survive until the next day. As Alna refuses to believe him, Diaz tells her about his dreams. He explains that his late parents asked him to help others and protect the weak as their final wish, which he took as his dream goal. Although Alna expected Diaz to be lying about his noble goal, her horn starts glowing blue, which forces her to believe him. In contrast, Diaz is a pure man, and he doesn't understand why the girl was suspecting him. She asks him if he's a friend or an enemy, but he reminds her that he's neither of those things since they've both just met. For some reason, Diaz's reasonable words just make her even angrier. He wonders why she's so frustrated. Then, he remembers that she's living in her domain, so she's one of his own subjects. Thinking that the girl is testing his sincerity to his subjects, he seriously declares that he is her loyal ally to comfort her. He promises to protect the girl from her enemies, no matter who they are, which causes her horn to shine radiantly. Even the girl is surprised by the intensity of Diaz's sincerity, and she suddenly drags him away somewhere. Soon, they enter a village of Anas. Diaz wonders why he couldn't find the village earlier, but he's given no time to react, as the girl drags him to her chief's house. Inside, the chieftain is surprised that Alna brought an outsider, since she's usually very careful around strangers. Alna tells her that her horn never turned red, and instead glowed a brilliant blue as he declared himself an ally. Hearing this, the chieftain asks Diaz if he will become her ally as well. He accepts, saying that he's the ally of everyone living in the village. However, when Diaz starts to explain that the king sent him, Alna gets up in a rage and points an arrow at him. The chieftain stops her since they haven't heard Diaz's full story, but she also glares at him and demands a full explanation. He stays calm under the threat and explains that his parents always told him to help others and protect the weak. Since they passed away early, Diaz was left an orphan. He gathered the other orphans in town to live together, and they survived by performing small chores and hunting weak monsters. As Diaz grew older, a war broke out with the neighboring nation, so he took his fighting skills to the battlefield. There, he displayed an incredible natural talent for fighting, so he quickly rose through the ranks. After 20 years of a bitter war, Diaz returned victorious, and the king granted him this empty domain as a reward. The chieftain nods, believing that he's sincere about ruling his domain. She then asks him if he'd still be her ally if she and her people were not subjects of his kingdom. Diaz smiles, saying that he'll still protect her as a neighbor. At his words, the chieftain's horn also glows blue, so Alna lowers her bow. Diaz wonders why she asked him such a strange question, and then he realizes something. The chieftain agrees, admitting that she and her people are not his subjects. In fact, her tribe is actually the enemy of his kingdom. Despite their circumstances, the chieftain thinks Diaz can be her ally since his aura is so blue. Before he decides to do anything, she asks him to hear her out. After introducing herself as Mal, she explains that her people were kicked out of the grassland over 50 years ago. Ever since then, they've been at war with his kingdom, trying to win their land back. Diaz wonders how they can live undetected within the kingdom's domain, so she explains that her species can use magic stored within their horns. To demonstrate, she goes invisible with a spell, leaving him stunned. Then, she also reveals that her people can easily conceal their entire village with the same magic. Diaz finally understands why he couldn't detect the village before, but he wonders why Mal is exposing such sensitive information chieftain to him. The chieftain smiles, saying that she wouldn't have trusted him if her horn didn't glow blue. It turns out that the Anis can detect the intentions of other species by relying on their horns. If a person has no bad intentions towards them, their horns remain colorless. However, if they have malicious intentions, their horns would turn red to warn them. Sometimes, a person might cause a blue glow, which means they are friendly towards the Oni people. Despite this, if the good-intentioned person begins to have evil intentions, the horn would immediately taint the blue color with red. Since Dayas never caused their horns to show the slightest shade of red, she thinks he's a completely trustworthy person. In fact, she thinks he's a simple-minded fool because he's still trying to honor his dead parents' wishes. Although Dayas is confused, Mal offers to help him rule his domain, promising to give him a house, some food, and some livestock to begin his life. In return, she hopes that he can keep her village secret from the king. Dayas accepts her offer and promises to protect her people as long as they don't threaten his kingdom. Mal is satisfied with his attitude, so she orders Alna to go with him and show him the ways of their village. Alna nods at first, but then she gets shocked after realizing her orders. Mal reminds her that she brought Dayas in the first place, so it's her job to look after him. Though she is frustrated, Alna agrees. Afterward, she goes out with Dayas and gets some villagers to build a house for him. In just a few hours, the villagers efficiently build a house with a wooden structure. Dayas is surprised by their speed, so Alne explains that her people aren't always able to hide. For this reason, they build their houses with lightweight structures so they can be easily removed in case of an emergency. Once the house is set up, Alna tells him that the food and livestock will be sent to him later. She offers to help him with the livestock later, so Dayas thanks her. However, he feels a bit concerned about the number of subjects in his territory and asks her if she's got a way to increase their population. Alna doesn't understand why he even wants more subjects, especially since food is limited in their empty land. She asks him how he'd take care of an increasing population, so Dayas realizes his mistake. She then gives him a bag of strange dust, explaining that it's a special bait that can attract wild animals. Alna tells Dayas to take the dust and spread it away from the village, and she explains that he can earn more money for every beast he gets. The brawny-headed Dayas smiles, happy to get a job that requires muscles instead of brains. A few minutes later, after going out for a good distance, he decides it is finally time to start hunting. However, since Alna never told him how much dust to use, he just spreads the entire bag like an idiot. This attracts an entire herd of wild cattle, but Dayas is only excited by the challenge. He lifts his axe and welcomes the herd, tearing through the beasts as if they're nothing. After hunting half a herd, the rest of the beasts run away, so Dayas is left with the corpses of their beloved relatives. Unfortunately, he finally remembers that he also has to carry the heavy beasts back home. Without a wagon to transport them, he leaves the other beasts behind and carries just a single one. As Dayas walks home, he feels worried that Alna will be upset with him, since she easily gets annoyed by his antics. To his surprise, she is pleased to see the giant beast, since meat is a rare resource in her village. Seeing his disappointed look, Alna wonders what's wrong, so he explains that he had to leave over 3 dozen beasts behind. Hearing how strong he is, she is shocked and instantly rethinks her opinion of him. Mal comes out as well and praises Dayas for his manly display. Alna agrees, and she runs off to alert the villagers so they can carry the rest of the beasts back. Dayas wonders what Mal means by manliness, so she explains that it's simply a man's ability to work. The more a man is able to work and earn, the manlier he is in the eyes of her tribe's women. After learning this, Dayas understands why Alne seems so pleased with him, but he thinks that looks and personality matter as well. Mal disagrees, saying that neither looks nor personality put food on the table. Dayas understands where she's coming from. He realizes that for a small tribe, food and survival are the only important things compared to the people living in the kingdom. Then, Mal tells him that he'll need to work a bit harder if he wants to marry a beauty like Alne. He gets embarrassed and acts like that wasn't his intention, so she starts teasing him even more. The next day, Dayas wakes up from the smell of fresh breakfast in his room. He finds Alna cooking for him, smiling in a completely submissive manner compared to earlier. After having breakfast, he praises her cooking, which causes her to blush. Watching him eat so closely, Alna is unable to bear the tension, so she changes the topic to hunting again. She explains that her tribe still needs a well for water and an outhouse to host guests, which will help Diaz expand his domain. However, the village does not have enough money to pay the craftsmen, so Diaz agrees to hunt for them. Alna asks him to hunt some monsters, so he thinks about it. Although monster meat is toxic and inedible, their rare materials sell for incredible prices. Diaz agrees to hunt, wondering if the peaceful grassland even has any monsters. Alna reveals that she can sense monsters with her magic horn, but Diaz refuses to put her in danger. However, she insists on going with him, so he agrees to take her. Later, as Diaz takes care of his cattle, some village men bring over food and blankets for him. Feeling the respect from them, he realizes that this village truly cares about the men who can protect them. Just then, Alna comes out of his hut after preparing for the journey. Diaz realizes that she's put on some makeup, while the other men get jealous of him. Meanwhile, Alna smiles, saying that the other men will take care of the cattle while they're out hunting. Both of them move out, and after reaching a rocky hill, Alna chants her magic to scout for monsters. A strange blue light surrounds her, which alerts her to the location of a nearby monster. Diaz nods and tells Alna to hide while he hunts the beast, but she refuses. Instead, she offers to help him while using her concealment, so he agrees to let her fight. After a short while, they find the monster, which looks like a giant turtle. Alna's eyes grow wide with shock, since she knows it's actually an earth dragon. However, Diaz doesn't share her fear. Despite her warnings, he jumps out to fight and tells her to remain behind. As the dragon notices him, he jumps on its back and whacks its hard shell. The impact fails to leave a single scratch, and instead breaks the tip of his axe. Diaz tries to attack the dragon's weak points, but it retreats into its shell for defense. Alna suggests running away while he still has the chance, since an earth dragon can wipe out an entire troop of men on its own. Diaz refuses to run since he's still got more tricks up his sleeve. He decides to whack the same spot until it cracks, and begins hammering away at the turtle's back. After a while of banging his axe uselessly, the blade starts cracking. Alna gets worried for him, but Diaz remains confident in his weapon. Since his axe is a special weapon used by a former shogun, it possesses the ability to repair light damage using a mending spell. However, Diaz can only force it to quickly repair itself with magic, so he mends it in front of Alna's shocked eyes. He then continues to pound the dragon's back relentlessly. Eventually, the toxic miasma radiating from the dragon condenses into the area, and Alna starts to feel sick. Realizing she's in danger, he agrees to leave after leaving a final strike. To his surprise, his final hit actually breaks through the dragon's shell. Enraged, the creature gets out of its shell and blows a fireball at him. Diaz dodges the fireball and slashes at the dragon's weak legs. As he prepares to attack, he realizes that the dragon has spotted Alna. Knowing that it's outmatched against Diaz, the clever monster targets her instead. Enraged by its audacity, Diaz jumps into the sky and plunges hard on the dragon, tearing through its spine and killing it. Alna immediately tears up at his display of bravery and rushes into his arms. Before Diaz can process her hug, she immediately declares that they're getting married. Diaz returns to the village shortly afterward, and with the help of several Oni villagers, he drags the earth dragon's massive body through the village. The villagers proudly announce that Diaz was the one who defeated the earth dragon completely on his own, and everyone around them begins cheering and praising him for such an amazing achievement. After the dragon's body is finally placed down safely, Diaz quietly watches all the villagers celebrating. However, he can't help wondering what everyone is so excited about, because he doesn't see defeating the earth dragon as a big deal. Mal then walks over to Diaz and says she still can't believe he managed to defeat the earth dragon all by himself. Diaz simply shrugs it off and says it really wasn't anything special. Rather than asking for treasure or praise, he says he would rather have a proper well and a privy built using the value of the earth dragon. Mal smiles and tells him that won't be a problem at all, because just one of the earth dragon's legs is valuable enough to pay for several feels absolutely awful. After the battle, Alna wrinkles her nose and tells Diaz to go wash himself properly because she's not letting him into the house while he smells like that. Diaz has no choice but to clean himself up before heading back. The following day, Diaz is lost in thought as he remembers how disappointing yesterday turned out to be. Instead of meeting new people who might become citizens of the village, they only ended up fighting another dangerous monster. Just then, Alna suddenly comes running toward him and excitedly announces that they're pregnant and are going to have little ones, though it turns out she was actually talking about Francois, who had finally become pregnant after waiting for a very long time. Alna then reminds Diaz that bars are incredibly intelligent creatures, but that intelligence comes with a weakness. They're much more sensitive to fear and emotional stress than most races, and that problem becomes even worse during pregnancy. Sometimes the pressure becomes so overwhelming that it can even cost them their lives. Because of that, Alna suggests that Diaz stay close to Francois and Francis for a while so they can feel safe and supported. For the time being, they'll all be staying together in the same yurt. Alna assumes Diaz probably won't like the arrangement because bars become especially smelly during pregnancy. To her surprise, Diaz honestly doesn't mind at all and agrees without complaining. Seeing his reaction makes Alna feel relieved because it shows just how thoughtful and considerate he really is. A moment later, Alna's horn suddenly begins to glow, which is a sign that monsters, or at least unfamiliar visitors, are nearby. She quickly explains that she can sense 10 horses approaching from the east. Diaz realizes that's the same direction as the royal capital, but he isn't expecting any visitors, making the situation seem suspicious. Diaz decides to go and investigate while Alna stays behind to watch over the village. He quickly runs across the open fields and soon spots the group of travelers. At first, he prepares himself in case they're enemies, but his attitude changes the moment he recognizes his old friend Klaus among them. He immediately greets him with a friendly handshake and asks what he's doing all the way out here. Klaus explains that the lady traveling with them is the one who came to see Diaz. Diaz has no idea who she's supposed to be, but he decides to bring the group back to his tent so they can talk in private. While there, he realizes it was a smart decision to hide everything except the yurt he built. He promised to keep the Oni village a secret, and explaining their existence to outsiders would have created a lot of unnecessary problems. Once everyone is settled, the young woman finally introduces herself as Diane, the third princess of the kingdom. She politely asks Diaz if his manor is still under construction because she hasn't seen any servants or signs of a noble's estate nearby. Diaz simply explains that he doesn't own a manor and has no servants working for him. The only home he has is the yurt standing in front of them, and even if it doesn't look very impressive, he spent a great deal of time building it with his own hands. Diane is surprised to hear that Diaz built everything around him with his own hands, especially because the king had supposedly given him a huge reward along with an even larger amount of money to help him get started. To her surprise, Diaz explains that he never received a single coin from the king. Instead, he was simply dropped off in the middle of nowhere without even being given food or water to survive. Putting that aside, Diaz asks Diane what brought her all the way out to such a remote place. Diane explains that a war is about to break out around the royal capital, and they've come to ask for his help because people now see him as the kingdom's heroic savior. As payment for his help, she even offers to marry him herself as a reward. However, Diaz has absolutely no interest in getting involved in another war. With Francois having just become pregnant, he has more important things to protect, so he calmly turns down her offer and politely asks Diane to leave if that's the only reason she came. One of Diane's guards becomes furious after hearing Diaz reject the princess's proposal and tries to intimidate him by swinging his sword. Before the attack can even reach him, Diaz reacts on pure instinct and knocks the weapon aside with a single strike, splitting the sword cleanly in half. The guard immediately prepares to attack again, but Klaus quickly steps in and stops him. He tells the others there's no point trying to fight Diaz because even if every one of them attacked together, they still wouldn't stand a chance against him. After the group leaves, Diaz looks around and realizes he may have used a little too much force. His attack damaged the floor matting inside the yurt, and he immediately realizes Alna is definitely going to scold him for making such a mess. Meanwhile, Diane quietly leaves while holding a grudge against Diaz for refusing both her request and her marriage offer. As Diaz steps outside, Alna suddenly suddenly reveals herself along with Francis and Francois, who had been hiding nearby the entire time. Alna explains that everyone who came with Diane left with a red aura except for one person, whose aura remained blue. She explains that a red aura represents hostility, while a blue aura shows trust or affection. After hearing that, Diaz figures the only person with the blue aura must have been Klaus. The following morning, Diaz wakes up to the smell of breakfast as Alna prepares the morning meal. While cooking, she suddenly tells him that there's a human wandering around nearby. What's strange is that the person doesn't seem to be searching for anything in particular and is simply walking around without any clear direction. Diaz assumes it's probably just a traveler who got lost, so he decides to go and check for himself. Alna, Francis, and Francois decide to follow him as well, but they use their concealment ability so they won't be seen by the visitor. After walking through the valley for a while, Diaz finally spots the traveler and realizes it's Klaus. When they meet, Diaz immediately notices that Klaus is no longer wearing his armor or carrying his sword. Klaus explains that he had himself dismissed from the army because he didn't want to end up fighting on the front lines of the coming war. Instead, he traveled all the way here because he wants to work for Diaz as his personal soldier. Hearing that, Diaz remembers that Klaus was the only person who never looked down on him for being an orphan, even when everyone else treated him differently. Klaus always treated him with respect. Diaz admits that having someone like Klaus by his side would be reassuring, but before making a decision, he feels he should ask Alna what she thinks. The next moment, Alna suddenly appears out of nowhere, completely catching Klaus by surprise. She tells Diaz there's nothing to worry about because Klaus has kept a blue aura the entire time, proving that he has no hostile intentions. Klaus immediately starts bombarding Diaz with questions about where Alna suddenly came from and how she appeared out of thin air. Diaz simply tells him it's a really long story before saying he'll explain everything once they get back home. It's now been 10 days since Klaus decided to leave his old life behind and start a new one with Diaz. During that time, Diaz kindly helped Klaus build a yurt of his own so he would have a proper place to live. He also gave Klaus a spear and a full set of armor made from the materials of the earth dragon Diaz defeated. Klaus knows these are incredibly valuable gifts that even members of the royal family would struggle to obtain. Because of everything Diaz has done for him, Klaus promises himself that he'll never betray the trust Diaz has placed in him. Later that day, Alna prepares lunch and serves everyone a warm meal. As Klaus eats, he's genuinely impressed by how delicious the food is. He praises Alna's cooking and tells her that she would make an excellent wife for Diaz. Hearing such a sincere compliment makes Alna smile, and she happily tells Klaus that he's welcome to have another serving if he'd like. While they continue eating, Klaus addresses Diaz as Lord and politely asks him to join the meal. Diaz immediately tells Klaus that he doesn't have to be so formal all the time and asks him to simply call him by his name instead. However, Klaus refuses, saying that it's important to make the difference in their positions clear. Seeing how serious Klaus is about it makes Diaz realize that Klaus is much more dedicated and enthusiastic than he first thought. Just then, Alna's horn suddenly begins glowing green. She immediately announces that she can sense 12 humans approaching from the east. As she continues focusing on their presence, Diaz learns that one of the 12 people is extremely weak and is already on the verge of death. Hearing that, he decides to head out into the fields and investigate the situation himself. Klaus quickly says he wants to come along and help, but Diaz tells him to stay behind and protect the village instead. He explains that someone needs to remain behind in case something unexpected happens. Diaz adds that if they run into any serious danger, he'll send Alna and Francis back immediately to warn him. With that decided, Diaz, Alna, and Francis leave the village and head toward the approaching group. After watching them disappear into the distance, Klaus begins thinking about who these visitors could be. He suspects they're probably people sent from the royal capital. Right now, the kingdom is caught in the middle of a fierce succession dispute between the 5 princes and princesses, with each of them fighting to become the next ruler. Klaus remembers that Princess Diane has far less military strength than any of her siblings. That's probably why she came all the way out here earlier in hopes of recruiting Diaz to fight on her side. Klaus also starts to suspect that the reason Diaz never received the reward the king promised him is because the second prince secretly took it for himself. Klaus knows that the conflict between the nobles won't stay in the capital forever. Eventually, that political political struggle will spread to this village as well. Even so, he doesn't fear what's coming. Instead, he quietly decides that if the day ever comes, he won't hesitate to fight and even give his life for Diaz if that's what it takes. Only a few moments later, Klaus is surprised to see Diaz returning much sooner than expected, along with a group of exhausted and worn-out refugees. Diaz and Ulna immediately begin taking care of the travelers, making sure everyone has somewhere to rest while giving food and water to those who need it most. By the time night falls, Diaz finally explains the situation to Klaus. He reveals that every one of those people had been driven out of the land they once called home, leaving them with nowhere else to go. The elderly women in the domain were kicked due to the massive food shortage. The people believed feeding old people was a waste, so they abandoned them. When Klaus hears this, he quickly realizes the neighboring domain must be the Castex. He actually passed through that place on his way here, and it was in terrible condition. The old woman lying on the ground is Granny Maya, who is also their leader. Diaz explains that she used her fortune-telling ability to find a way for them to survive, which is how they ended up here. But instead of seeing this as a problem, Diaz is happy because they have just gained 12 new subjects for his domain. Diaz immediately starts building yurts for the new arrivals, but Klaus stops him. He reminds Diaz that these elderly people won't be able to do much work or help the domain grow. Diaz simply smiles and says that makes them even more valuable because they can teach everyone the secrets to living a long life. Ulna agrees with Diaz and says they should warmly welcome their new people. At that moment, Klaus finally understands that this way of thinking is the reason Diaz has managed to come this far. Klaus remembers his time as a knight during the war. When things became hopeless, every other soldier decided to run away and save themselves. Diaz was the only one who stayed behind. Instead of thinking about himself, he rescued a crying child and safely brought the child back to his mother. As enemy soldiers closed in on them, Klaus and Diaz fought side by side and defeated the entire squad by themselves. Klaus ended up covered in injuries after the battle, but Diaz didn't even have a single scratch. Even after winning, Diaz was more concerned about calming down a crying baby than celebrating the victory. Remembering that day makes Klaus realize what a fool he had been. Back then, he believed the greatest honor was dying for Diaz, but now he understands that his real purpose is to stay alive and continue supporting him for as long as he can. By the next day, Diaz finishes building all the yurts, so everyone gathers inside one of them for a meeting. Grandma Maya tells Diaz that the elderly people will still be useful. When the bar wool starts piling up, they can spin the yarn and turn it into cloth. Diaz thinks that would be a huge help for the village. However, everyone notices that Diaz doesn't look very happy, so they ask him what's bothering him. Diaz explains that now that he finally has enough people, he wants to officially give their settlement a name, but he can't come up with one that he likes. The others quickly suggest calling it Diaz Village, but he refuses because he doesn't want the village to be named after himself. Klaus then suggests Dragon Slayer Village, but everyone rejects that idea too. Then Ulna speaks up with another idea. She suggests calling it Iluk Village, which means the first village in the ancient language. Diaz immediately likes how it sounds, and everyone agrees that it is the perfect name. Just like that, their new home officially becomes Iluk Village. After the meeting ends, Grandma Maya quietly walks over to Diaz. She can tell he wants to bring more people into the village, so she gives him an idea. She suggests selling the dragon materials he has collected and using the money to buy some slaves. Diaz immediately rejects that idea because he hates slavery. During the war, he saw countless enslaved soldiers on the battlefield, and every one of them was treated terribly. Because of those experiences, he has already decided that the buying and selling of slaves will be completely banned in his domain. After hearing his answer, Grandma Maya admits that she only brought up the idea as a test to see how he would respond. She apologizes for testing him, but explains that it's because they have suffered under many cruel people in the past. Diaz knows she is talking about the Castex. He promises her that Iluk Village will never become a place like that, and that everyone living there will be treated with respect. The next day, a traveling merchant arrives at Diaz's domain. Diaz is completely surprised when he realizes the merchant is actually a frog. The merchant climbs down from his horse and introduces himself as Pagan. He explains that he came to inspect the dragon materials they want to sell. Diaz looks over at Ulna's horn and notices that it has turned white, showing that Pagan has no hostile intentions toward them. Feeling at ease, Diaz places places the dragon materials in front of him. Pagan is stunned by how enormous they are. Looking at them more closely, he starts wondering if Diaz is really telling the truth about defeating such a huge dragon all by himself. Instead of arguing or trying to convince him with words, Diaz decides to prove it through action. He uses his signature attack and slices one of the dragon scales cleanly in half with a single strike. Seeing that incredible display of strength is all the proof Pagan needs, he immediately accepts that Diaz truly was the one who defeated the dragon. After that, Pagan brings out two young girls and says he hopes Diaz will take them for a fair price. Diaz immediately looks at the girls and assumes they are being sold as slaves, which makes him furious. Just as he is about to react, Alna grabs his hand and tells him to calm down. Granny Maya then steps forward and politely tells Pagan that they have no interest in buying slaves. Pagan quickly explains the situation. He says the two girls are not slaves at all. They are twin sisters, and the village where they were born believed that twins only brought disaster and bad luck. Because of that belief, the villagers planned to execute them. Their parents escaped with the girls and hid deep inside the forest. As time passed, both of their parents became seriously ill and realized they did not have much time left. Before they died, they met Pagan and begged him to take care of the twins. At first, Pagan refused because he was a merchant, not someone who did charity work. However, the parents offered him a large amount of money, and he eventually accepted. Now that all of that money has been spent, continuing to care for the girls has only pushed him deeper into debt. With no other choice, he asks Diaz to take the twins in. Alna tells Diaz that Pagan is speaking honestly, so Diaz agrees to take custody of the girls. He even offers to repay Pagan for everything he spent while taking care of them. Pagan is deeply grateful for Diaz's kindness. Diaz then gently picks up the two girls and welcomes them to the village. He asks for their names, and they shyly introduce themselves as Senai and Ihan. Diaz smiles and tells them they both have beautiful names. He then asks them to go and take a bath with Olna so they can get cleaned up before dinner. After the girls leave, Klaus admits that he is surprised by how naturally Diaz gets along with children. Diaz explains that when he was younger, he acted like an older brother and father figure to the other orphans, so taking care of children comes naturally to him. By sunset, Senai and Ihan return after their bath, and Diaz notices how clean and refreshed they look. At the same time, Granny Maya realizes that the twins are not completely human. Even so, she feels they will fit in perfectly with everyone living in Iluk village. A little later, Alna walks over to the twins and explains that their names have a strong connection to the moon in the ancient language. Because of that, she gives each of them an Ahai jewel, saying that the power of the moon is believed to rest inside those stones. Hearing those words reminds Senai and Ihan of their parents. The memory is enough to make both of them burst into tears. Diaz and Alna immediately hug the girls and comfort them, telling them they no longer have to worry because they are finally safe. As the twins spend time getting to know the bars, Alna quietly tells Diaz that Senai and Ihan do not appear to be fully human. Diaz listens carefully but does not seem bothered by it. Around 10 days later, the twins have become much more comfortable living in the village. They can even be seen arguing with each other over a half-eaten potato. Suddenly, Alne senses that a single person is riding toward the village on horseback. Diaz says he will go and see who it is. Before he leaves, Senai and Ihan ask him to come back home safely. Out in the open field, Diaz spots the rider approaching. Alna senses a white presence coming from him, meaning he has no hostile intentions. After reaching them, the man introduces himself as Camelots from the Castex domain. He explains that the ruler of the Castex, Lord Eldon, wishes to meet with Diaz. Camelot says Lord Eldon is already on his way and asks if it would be alright for the meeting to take place inside Diaz's manor. Before he can finish speaking, Diaz cuts him off and says they will meet right here instead. Camelot understands his decision and rides away to deliver the message. As Diaz waits, he thinks about the situation. A newly appointed lord coming here can only mean that the second prince's rebellion was successful. Even so, Diaz has already made up his mind. No matter what happens, he will not allow Lord Eldon anywhere near Iluk village. A short while later, Diaz looks into the distance and is shocked when he finally sees Lord Eldon approaching. Diaz knows that the lord of the Castek domain is rumored to have many female slaves around him. Because of this, Diaz immediately decides that he doesn't want someone like that anywhere near his people. However, Diaz Diaz is left completely shocked when Alnay informs him that the Lord and all of his people have a blue, friendly aura. This makes Diaz realize that his first impression of Eldon may have been completely wrong. The Lord then excitedly runs over to Diaz and introduces himself as Eldon. Eldon explains that ever since he was a child, he has heard stories about Diaz's incredible achievements as the heroic savior. Because of those stories, Eldon has always looked up to Diaz and greatly respected him. Diaz quickly realizes that he had gotten the wrong idea about Eldon. He apologizes for his earlier thoughts and welcomes Eldon and his people to the village. Putting that aside, Eldon suddenly asks Diaz who the young woman standing beside him is. Both Diaz and Alna are immediately shocked by the question. After all, Alna is currently using her camouflage ability, which should make her completely invisible. Eldon explains that he can't actually see Alna, but his ears and nose are extremely sharp. Even though she is invisible, he is still able to sense her presence. Realizing that there is no point in hiding anymore, Alna decides to reveal herself. She deactivates her camouflage and introduces herself to Eldon as Diaz's wife. Eldon immediately notices the horn on Alna's head and assumes that she is a demi-human. However, Alna quickly corrects him and explains that she isn't a demi-human at all. She is actually an anican. Alna admits that she has never heard the term demi-human before, so Eldon explains what it means. He says that demi-human is a general term used to describe people who aren't human but are still similar to humans in some ways. After hearing this explanation, Alna realizes that she is technically a demi-human after all. She admits this to Eldon, and the moment he hears it, he becomes extremely happy. Tears of joy even begin to fill his eyes as he excitedly asks Diaz if he and Alna already have any children together. Diaz admits that they don't have any children yet. However, Alna quickly adds that she plans to have at least 10 children with Diaz in the future. Alna then mentions that Diaz is currently raising 2 demi-human orphans. Hearing this makes Eldon incredibly excited. He becomes so overwhelmed with happiness that he suddenly transforms into an elephant and uses his trunk to pick Diaz up. Diaz is completely shocked by this and finally realizes that Eldon is actually a demi-human as well. However, the transformation seems to have taken a serious toll on Eldon's body. Diaz and the others quickly take Eldon back to his carriage so he can rest. There, Camelot explains that Eldon is actually half demi-human and has the ability to switch between his human and animal forms. However, changing between his 2 forms puts a lot of stress on his body. Because of this, Eldon depends heavily on the care and support of his devoted wives, who help look after him. Eldon then speaks up and explains that he simply became too excited earlier and transformed without thinking about the strain it would put on his body. Unfortunately, his body couldn't keep up with his excitement, which is why he became so exhausted afterward. Diaz understands Eldon's situation, but he soon shifts the conversation toward the rebellion that is currently taking place. Eldon doesn't deny that he is involved in the rebellion. However, he explains that his actions are not meant to cause trouble for no reason. According to Eldon, he is only fighting because he wants to protect the people who are closest to him. Camelot explains that the whole situation began when Eldon was still a child. The previous lord of the Casdek domain, Lord Inkars, had a wife and 2 sons. However, Inkars treated his first son poorly because the boy looked too much like him. Instead, Inkars was much prouder of his other son, who was handsome, bright, and born to an elephant kin. Inkars eventually declared this second son to be his true heir and gave him an important position and authority within the domain. That son was Eldon. Eldon explains that until he was 4 years old, he believed that he was a completely normal human. However, one day, he discovered the truth about himself and learned that he was actually a demi-human. He also discovered something even more shocking. His true mother was being kept as a slave. From that moment on, Eldon began spending more time with his mother and slowly developed a close relationship with her. At the same time, he secretly worked behind the scenes to protect other demi-humans living in the domain. Eldon had to keep all of this hidden from his father, Inkars, because he knew that if his father ever discovered what he was doing, the demi-humans would likely be placed in chains and treated even worse. Eldon then tells Diaz that his greatest wish is to live in a world where everyone can live together in peace, regardless of where they come from or whether they are human or demi-human. After hearing his story, Alna remembers something she heard about Eldon and asks him about the rumor that the Lord's second son has a large group of female slaves around him. Camelot explains that the rumor was actually created intentionally as part of their plan. The truth is completely different. Eldon and his wives genuinely love each other, and their relationship is based on real affection rather than slavery. Alna finds this incredibly sweet and thinks their relationship is actually very cute. However, Camelot explains that keeping up this deception was not easy. Eventually, Lord Ankars became suspicious and nearly started a full-scale war against everyone in his domain. Fortunately, Eldon was prepared for such a situation. He managed to gather his own forces and stood against his father's army. In the end, Eldon and his allies successfully defeated the entire army of Lord Ankars. After explaining everything, Eldon turns his attention back to Diaz. He tells Diaz how much he respects him and explains that he has heard countless stories about his achievements as the heroic savior. Eldon has admired Diaz for a long time and hopes that the two of them can remain on good terms. More importantly, Eldon hopes that they can work toward creating a world where humans and demi-humans can live together peacefully. Diaz tells Eldon that he already supports those ideals. After all, everyone in Iluk village already lives together peacefully, regardless of whether they are human or non-human. Diaz admits that it would be wonderful if the rest of the world could become like Iluk village, where everyone is able to live together without hatred or discrimination. Hearing this, Eldon's eyes begin to fill with tears. He realizes that the dream he has spent so much of his life fighting for is already being put into practice right in front of him. For the first time, Eldon sees proof that a world where humans and demi-humans can peacefully coexist may actually be possible. After that, Diaz and Eldon spend some time talking and thinking of ways to encourage more people to move into their domains. Diaz considers spreading the word through merchants who travel between different areas, while Eldon says that he plans to make an official announcement in Kasdek to let people know about the opportunities available in his domain. Before leaving, Eldon also gives Diaz some advice. He suggests that Diaz start building up a much larger food supply because he will need plenty of food if he plans to expand his domain and welcome more people. Diaz thanks Eldon for the advice and promises to keep it in mind. By sunset, Eldon finally gets into his carriage and begins his journey back to Kasdek. Diaz then returns home, but the moment he arrives, Senai and Ihan immediately start scolding him for not coming back when he promised. The two children are so angry that their voices are practically loud enough to blow Diaz's face off. Their tantrum eventually becomes so exhausting that both of them completely run out of energy and fall asleep. Diaz and Alnay then stay nearby and watch over them. Alnay thinks Diaz should have scolded the children because they were punching and kicking him while complaining about how late he was. They even insisted on staying awake because Diaz had broken his promise to come home on time. Diaz admits that their behavior isn't exactly good, but he also knows that he was the one who broke his promise first. Because of that, he decides to let the children off this time. Putting that aside, Diaz tells Alnay about his conversation with Eldon and explains that he plans to start a crop farm to increase their food production. Alnay is just about to give Diaz her opinion on the idea when something suddenly changes. Her horn begins glowing, and she immediately senses that there are 5 intruders nearby. Diaz and Alna realize that the 5 people are coming from a completely different direction than Eldon's group. Because of this, they assume that the newcomers must be bandits. Diaz tells Alna to stay behind while he investigates, but Alna quickly reminds him that it is far too dark for him to see properly on his own. She explains that he will need her help to find the intruders. Diaz realizes that she has a point, so the two of them head out together to find out who has entered their territory. Meanwhile, several hooded men carrying torches are seen standing in the middle of a field. They have traveled all this way with one goal in mind. They want to take down Diaz at all costs. The bandits know that they would have no chance against him in broad daylight, so they decided to sneak into his territory at night and catch him by surprise. At first, the group feels confident that their plan will work. However, their confidence quickly disappears when arrows suddenly begin flying toward them from the darkness. The arrows are coming from the direction of a strange red light in the distance. The bandit leader immediately orders the others to keep firing at the enemy. The group continues shooting arrows toward the red light, hoping to hit whoever is hiding there. After firing for a while, they finally manage to hit someone. The bandits believe they have figured out the enemy's location, so they immediately charge toward the area to finish the attack. But they have made a huge mistake. Before they can even react, Diaz suddenly appears out of nowhere and takes down 4 of the bandits bandits at once. The bandit leader is completely shocked by what he sees. He is then distracted by the glowing light coming from Alna's horn. But before he can figure out what is happening, Diaz suddenly appears directly in front of him. Diaz delivers a powerful kick that sends the bandit leader flying and knocks him unconscious. Meanwhile, the person who hired the bandits manages to escape from the battlefield. As he runs away, he begins regretting ever getting involved with Diaz in the first place. However, one of his old injuries suddenly starts acting up again, causing him to collapse on the ground. As he lies there in pain, the man begins blaming Diaz for everything that has happened to him. He remembers that back when they first met, Diaz was nothing more than an ordinary commoner. The nobleman can't believe that someone like Diaz had the nerve to attack him despite his noble status. Because of this humiliation, the man swears that he will get revenge on Diaz someday, no matter what it takes. Back at the battlefield, Diaz and Alna manage to round up all the remaining bandits. Diaz looks at them and can't believe they were foolish enough to come into his territory and try their luck as bandits. As the lord of the land, Diaz prepares to announce their punishment. Alna expects something serious, perhaps even a brutal punishment like beheading. However, Diaz surprises her. Instead of killing them, he simply gives them a warning and kicks them out of his territory. Diaz explains that nobody was seriously hurt during the incident, so he is willing to let them go this time. However, he warns them that if they ever return to his domain to cause trouble again, he won't be nearly as forgiving. Alna understands his decision, and the two of them begin walking back home together. As they walk, Alna starts thinking about the first time she ever met Diaz. She remembers how shocked she was when she first saw a grown man lying carelessly in the middle of a field. At the time, she assumed Diaz was a bandit and briefly considered killing him. However, for some reason, she decided to speak to him instead. Looking back on everything that has happened since then, Alna realizes that choosing not to kill Diaz was probably the best decision she has ever made. Thinking about how much her life has changed because of that one decision makes Alna become emotional. Suddenly, she decides to do something unexpected. Alna activates her camouflage and turns completely invisible. Alna quietly sneaks up behind him and gives him a quick kiss on the cheek. But just 10 seconds later, Alna becomes incredibly embarrassed by what she has done. She immediately turns around and runs away. Diaz is left confused for a moment before realizing what just happened. He then starts chasing after her as Alna runs away, completely embarrassed by her sudden burst of affection. The next day, Diaz meets up with Mal and tells her that he wants to start growing crops on the grasslands. Unfortunately, Mal tells him that it will not be possible because, for some unknown reason, crops simply do not grow on these plains no matter what people try. Even so, Diaz refuses to give up. He tells Mal that all he really needs is advice on how to grow potted plants. Even if the experiment fails, he still wants to give it a shot and see what happens for himself. Mal eventually agrees to help. She explains that he needs to crush some verdant leaf stones together with animal bones before mixing the powder into the soil. She also warns him that this method works much better for growing potted plants and medicinal herbs than it does for growing vegetables. However, Diaz does not really understand the difference. To him, medicinal herbs and vegetables all look like different kinds of grass, so he cannot tell them apart. Mal admits that she is not completely sure about the difference either, but she says the forestkin would definitely know the answer. Diaz has never heard of the forestkin before, so he asks who they are. Mal explains that they are an ancient race with deep knowledge of forests and plants. According to the stories, they know almost everything about nature and even have the power to turn a lifeless wasteland into a land full of trees and greenery. That said, Mal admits she has never actually seen a forestkin herself, so she is not even sure whether they really exist or if they are just part of old legends. After that, Mal agrees to help Diaz with his cultivation plans. She tells him that if everything works out, she would like him to teach everyone how to grow crops properly because the village is trying to create a more stable food supply and can no longer rely on luck alone. Diaz immediately agrees and tells her that helping everyone was his plan from the very beginning. Hearing that makes Mal very happy. She then jokingly says that she already has high expectations for the children that Diaz and Olney will have together. together someday. The moment Diaz hears those words, his face instantly turns bright blue from embarrassment, leaving him completely speechless. Later that day, Diaz returns to the domain. The twins immediately notice him and happily run over to greet him, excited that he came home early today instead of staying out until late like usual. Diaz opens his bag and proudly shows the twins what he brought back. The bag is filled with pretty stones that he collected, but the girls quickly lose interest when they realize it is nothing more than a bag full of rocks. After that, they run off to play with the sheep instead. A little while later, Ulna arrives. After Diaz tells her about the stones he found, she immediately explains that they contain no magical energy at all. They cannot even store magical energy, which means they are basically just ordinary rocks. Diaz understands how Ulna was able to figure that out so quickly, but he has no idea how Ihan and Senai were able to tell just by looking at them. Ulna smiles and explains that the twins are surprisingly talented despite being so young. There are even times when they can sense tiny traces of magical energy that she cannot detect herself. Ulna says that if the twins continue training seriously, they might even grow strong enough to surpass the village chieftain one day. Hearing that makes Diaz genuinely happy, and he becomes excited to see how much stronger they will become in the future. Later that day, Diaz is busy finishing up the work of crushing the verdant leaves when Ulna suddenly walks in. She tells him that she has sensed a group of intruders approaching from the east. Without wasting a second, Diaz and Ulna immediately head out into the open field to investigate. Ulna prepares to fire an attack at the approaching group, but before she can do anything, Diaz suddenly tells her to stop because he recognizes them. The people coming toward them are actually Camelots and his group. Ulna takes the telescope and looks more carefully. She notices that they also brought their white geese with them, making her wonder why they came all the way here. As she continues watching, she notices something strange moving around in the back of one of the wagons. Diaz says they can simply ask Camelots what he is carrying once he arrives. Meanwhile, hidden inside the back of the wagon, a rat with glasses happily says how lucky they were to escape the slave hunters and secretly sneak into the wagon without getting caught. However, another rat immediately points out that this wagon is not even traveling toward the desert. He says they should jump off before it is too late. The others quickly refuse because they have a completely different goal. They explain that they are actually searching for Diaz, the famous dragon slayer. Their plan is to kill the human who defeated a dragon so they can prove just how powerful they are. The rat with glasses does everything it can to convince them to give up on such a reckless idea, but none of them listen. They are all convinced they can win because a mysterious hooded figure told them they were strong enough to defeat him. Not long after that, Camelots finally arrives at Diaz's domain. He climbs down from the carriage, greets Diaz with a smile, and explains that he has come to deliver all the supplies and items that Lord Eldon promised to send him. The rats suddenly hear Diaz talking outside the wagon and immediately realize that the voice belongs to him. They become nervous right away and start making noise in the back of the wagon without meaning to. Hearing the strange sounds, Diaz walks over to check what is inside. The moment he opens the wagon door, the rats burst out all at once and immediately prepare to attack him. Diaz is completely caught off guard by the sudden ambush, but Ulna quickly steps in front of him and blocks the first group before they can reach him. The second group gets angry after their attack fails and starts yelling insults at Ulna. Hearing someone insult Ulna immediately makes Diaz angry, so he casually swats that entire group away with a single hit. The fight does not last very long. Diaz quickly rounds up all of the rats without much trouble, making it clear that they never stood a chance against him. After everything settles down, Camelots bows his head and sincerely apologizes for what happened. He explains that all of the rats causing trouble are actually members of his own domain. Diaz is surprised to hear that these little rats actually belong to Camelots' people. Camelots explains that even though they may look like ordinary animals, they are actually a race of intelligent folk with their own language, customs, and culture. Their race is officially known as the Mouskin, although they strongly prefer to call themselves the desert folk instead. After learning more about the Mouskin, Diaz tells Camelots that he will leave the punishment entirely up to him. He says Camelots does not need to do anything else to make up for what happened because the matter is already settled. Still, if Camelots truly feels responsible and insists on making it up to him, Diaz says he is willing to accept whatever he offers. With that settled, Camelots hands Diaz the cargo manifest. Diaz looks through the list and remembers that all he asked Lord Eldon for were a few farming tools. However, after reading the document, he realizes there is far more cargo than he ever requested. Diaz then reads the letter that came with the shipment and learns that Lord Eldon included a huge number of gifts. Along with the farming tools, he also sent the wagons and horses for transportation. The letter explains that these gifts are meant to strengthen the friendship between them and encourage trade between their territories in the future. Diaz is deeply touched after reading the letter, but what surprises him the most is the fact that Lord Eldon considers everything a simple gift between friends and expects absolutely nothing in return, as if that were not enough. Camelot also tells Diaz that they brought all the materials needed to build stables for the new horses and cattle. They even brought enough workers to build the stables themselves, saving Diaz both time and effort. At this point, Diaz feels incredibly grateful and starts wondering how he will ever be able to repay such kindness. Alna becomes so excited at the thought of finally having horses that she suddenly runs over and throws her arms around Diaz. The force of the hug knocks him straight to the ground, and she continues squeezing him so tightly that he can barely breathe. Later, while they are riding home together, Alna tells Diaz that her family was never very wealthy while she was growing up. Because of that, she always dreamed of owning a pet horse someday but never had the chance. Now that they finally have horses, she can hardly contain her excitement. Diaz becomes curious and asks if there was any reason why her family wasn't well off. And Alna immediately replies that the reason they struggled so much was because her brother was a completely worthless punk. After saying that, Alna changes the subject and brings up the hug she gave Diaz earlier, feeling a little embarrassed. She apologizes in case she hugged him a little too tightly or made things awkward for him. Meanwhile, with Granny Maya's help, Klaus begins tilling the fields and is genuinely impressed by how the whole process works. By the next day, the farmland is already starting to look much better thanks to all of the advice Granny Maya has been giving them. While everyone is enjoying a picnic together, Granny Maya suggests that they dig a cistern. She explains that the nearby stream is too small to depend on, so they will need another source of water once the dry summer season arrives. Just then, Ihan and Senai show up to tell Diaz that the food is ready and that he should come back home to eat. Diaz smiles, thinking it is sweet that the twins came all the way out just to deliver the message. He picks both of them up and carries them back home, but before long he notices that they have been acting strangely. Their expressions seem different, making Diaz wonder if something is bothering them. As they continue walking, Senai suddenly breaks the silence and asks Diaz if he would be sad if he found out that they had been keeping secrets from him. Diaz thinks about it for a moment before answering. He tells them that he might feel a little sad, but it would not be a very big deal because everyone has secrets that they keep to themselves. The moment they hear his answer, both twins let out relieved expressions, as if a huge weight has been lifted off their shoulders. A short while later, Diaz puts them down, and they quickly run back into the yurts together. Later that night, as the twins sleep peacefully, Diaz remembers how strangely they acted earlier. He also remembers asking Ihan and Senai why they had brought up such a question, but the two of them refused to explain what they meant. Over the next few days, Diaz keeps an eye on the twins. They slowly go back to acting like their usual cheerful selves, and after seeing them laugh and play again, Diaz gradually stops worrying and forgets about the whole conversation. 3 days later, it is finally time to sow the fields. Alna hands Diaz a pouch filled with seeds, and he immediately starts planting them across the farmland. As he works, Diaz thinks these seeds will be perfect for testing whether the soil can finally grow crops. Not long after that, the stables are completed. Diaz is impressed by how quickly Camelot and his people managed to finish building everything. Diaz thanks Camelot for all of his hard work and tells him that he has already prepared something for him to take back home. The gift turns out to be several earth dragon materials. Diaz explains that it is not payment for the work they did, but simply a token of his appreciation. The moment Camelot and the others hear what the gift is, they almost have heart attacks. They know just how valuable earth dragon materials are, so they immediately refuse to accept something so precious. By the following day, however, Diaz finally manages to convince them to take the materials. He insists that they should not think of them as payment, but simply as a gift from a friend who wanted to show his gratitude. After that, Diaz and Olna head back to the fields to check on the crops. Unfortunately, they are disappointed to discover that none of the seeds have germinated. The entire experiment has failed. Even so, Diaz refuses to give up. He says he will simply plant another batch of seeds and see if the next attempt produces better results. The following day, the exact same thing happens. Once again, none of the seeds sprout. Diaz starts wondering if maybe he is not crushing enough verdant leaves before mixing them into the soil. The day after that ends in another complete failure. At this point, he slowly begins losing hope that growing crops in this land is even possible. Seeing how frustrated he has become, Alna gently tells him that it is probably time to give the idea a rest. She reminds him that everyone already knows crops simply cannot grow in this domain. Diaz takes a moment to think about her words before finally agreeing. He realizes she has a point, so the two of them quietly walk back home together, deciding to leave the farming idea behind for now. Ayhan and Senai notice how disappointed Diaz looks after giving up on the farm, and they desperately want to do something to help him. The twins take out their moon amulet and speak into it, hoping to contact their mom and dad. However, instead of hearing their parents' voices, a strange voice suddenly answers their call and desperately begs them for help. It sounds terrified and keeps crying out for someone to save it. Hearing the cries, Ayhan and Senai notice that the voice seems to be coming from inside one of the yurts. Curious and a little nervous, the two of them slowly walk inside to find out what is waiting for them. Ayhan and Senai work together to open the box, but they are shocked when they find one of the mouse bandits hiding inside. The mouse immediately starts begging for mercy, but the twins assure her that they are not going to hurt her. They introduce themselves and ask for her name. She tells them she is Eimer, a member of the Mouskin clan. Although she looks small, Eimer explains that she is actually a fully grown woman. She then shows them the book she has been studying. The twins ask how she ended up inside the box and assume she was being punished, but Eimer explains that it is a little more complicated than that. Her clan had been planning something against Diaz, and Eimer was caught up in the situation. The twins then ask if she is friends with Diaz, but Eimer says she has never even met him before. The twins decide to ask Eimer for advice about a secret that Diaz and the others absolutely cannot find out about. After hearing everything, Eimer realizes that the twins are members of the Forestkin clan. She learns that the Forestkin live in the forest, protect it, and eventually become one with it. Senai shows Eimer her necklace and explains their clan's tradition. When a Forestkin is close to death, they place their strength and knowledge into a seed. That seed is then given to someone they trust, who protects and nurtures it until it grows into a tree. The tree becomes like a grave for the person who passed away. By touching it, they can feel the emotions of the departed and even gain some of their knowledge, making the tree almost like a living book. Eimer quickly understands everything, impressing the twins with how fast she learns. Senai then explains that they are still children, so their abilities are limited. They can make plants sprout and create small barriers, but they were forbidden from showing these powers to humans. Their parents made them promise never to reveal their abilities because they feared humans would eventually misuse their power. Eimer understands their situation, but wonders why they still live with Diaz if they are supposed to hide their powers. The twins admit they once considered running away, but Diaz was so kind and welcoming that they could not bring themselves to leave. They also say that everyone in the village treats them kindly, and they now consider the villagers their family. They know Diaz works hard every day trying to grow crops, but nothing seems to work because the earth's power is constantly being drained from the land. The twins believe a barrier could stop this from happening. They do not think Diaz would misuse their powers, but they still want to keep their promise to their parents. So, they ask Eimer if there is a way to create the barrier without anyone noticing. Eimer suggests doing it at night while everyone is asleep. The twins point out that they would be asleep too, but Eimer promises to wake them up and guide them to the farm. Since she has excellent night vision, the twins happily agree to the plan. After the twins leave, Eimer quietly hopes that their plan will actually work. Later that night, Eimer gets up to drink some water before slipping through a small hole in the yurt. She quickly makes her way over to wake the twins up, but on the way, she notices Diaz sleeping nearby. nearby. The moment she smells his sweaty armpits, she immediately backs away in disgust. Eimer then hurries over to Ihan and Senai and carefully wakes them up, just as she promised. The twins quietly sneak outside with her, but the moment they step into the darkness, they start feeling nervous. The forest looks much scarier at night, and they are not used to being outside alone. Eimer asks what they normally do when they need to use the bathroom at night. The twins explain that Alna and Diaz always accompany them. Eimer realizes that getting them to the farm without anyone noticing might be harder than she expected. However, Ihan grabs the necklace around his neck and looks at the seed their parents entrusted to them. Remembering their promise gives the twins the courage they need to continue. The three eventually reach the field. The twins kneel down and begin performing their ritual while Eimer watches. A bright green light surrounds them as they use their powers to restore the Earth's energy. Eimer is amazed by what they can do despite being so young. Once the ritual is finished, the twins are completely exhausted and can barely keep their eyes open. They start heading back to the yurt to sleep, but they are so tired that they accidentally forget to let go of Eimer. As a result, Eimer ends up sleeping beside them for the rest of the night. Meanwhile, at a local diner, a man wearing a red hood overhears some villagers talking about Eldon traveling to the royal capital. He plans to present the king with the Earth Dragon magic stone he received from Diaz. The villagers are excited because they believe this will improve Eldon's reputation if he eventually becomes the new domain lord. They think Kazdex will become a safer place. They also discuss the strange rumor that Diaz has a demi-human wife. They find it unusual because Diaz comes from the east, where people are known for disliking demi-humans. Still, they assume it must have been love at first sight. The conversation then turns to the Mouskin clan. Someone claims that another person manipulated them into causing trouble in Diaz's territory and says the culprit might have been a member of the Monkeykin clan. However, the others dismiss the story and believe the Mouskin are simply making excuses to avoid taking responsibility. The man in the red hood eventually leaves the diner and enters a nearby alley. He removes his hood and angrily admits that he is frustrated because his plan to manipulate the Mouskin clan failed. This setback has damaged his plans, but he swears that he will eventually kill Diaz. Elsewhere, several knights discuss the news that Kazdex is getting a new lord. They believe this will create serious problems for second Prince Miser because the previous lord controlled much of the western trade, which made Miser extremely wealthy. Eldon is also doing everything he can to distance himself from Miser. The knights wonder if this could allow first Prince Richard to become crown prince, but they believe it is still unlikely because the other three princesses have not given up yet. They do agree that Princess Diane has almost no chance of winning. However, one of the guards suddenly rushes in with surprising news. Princess Diane has already left the royal capital with a huge number of soldiers. The knights simply shrug it off and say that dealing with her is someone else's problem. The next morning, Alna wakes up screaming when she sees Eimer sleeping in Senai's arms. She immediately grabs both of them and gives them a very thorough bath because she knows that mice can potentially carry dangerous diseases. Eimer apologizes to Alna for what happened, but Alna simply tells her to stop talking and focus on properly scrubbing herself. After making sure all three of them are clean, Alna makes them sit together in the corner and think about what they have done. Diaz thinks Alna might be being a little too harsh on them, but he also understands that getting a good scolding can be a valuable lesson and experience for them. Diaz then takes another look at Eimer and realizes that she must have been one of the attackers he failed to notice during the Mouskin raid. However, Alna tells him that Eimer's status is showing up as blue, meaning she is not considered an enemy. Because of that, Diaz decides not to worry about her and simply lets her stay with the others. A little later, one of the grannies calls Diaz over and excitedly shows him something happening at the crop farm. The crops are finally beginning to show signs of life. Granny is especially impressed because the grass is growing in a strange circular pattern, even though they use two completely different types of soil in the field. Alna is extremely happy to see the progress and praises Diaz for all the hard work he has been putting into the farm. She tells him how happy she is that his efforts are finally starting to pay off. Diaz says that he is happy too, although Diaz is obviously pleased to see the crop farm finally making progress. What makes him even happier is seeing how excited and happy Alna is about it. Seeing her smile makes all the hard work feel even more worthwhile to him. Sometime later, Diaz leaves the yurt carrying the wooden box that Eimer had originally been trapped inside. However, just as he steps outside, a random pigeon suddenly lands on top of the box and starts speaking. Diaz is caught completely off guard by the talking bird. He carefully picks the pigeon up and puts it down before the bird introduces itself. It says that its name is Geraint and that it is a special messenger working directly for Lord Eldon. Geraint explains that he is actually a demi-human from the Pigeonkin clan. He then tells Diaz that he has an important letter from Lord Eldon that he has been ordered to deliver personally. Diaz opens the letter and reads its contents. It turns out to be a message from Lord Eldon about some dogkin who have recently become interested in moving to Diaz's domain. Eldon wants to know whether Diaz would be willing to accept them as new residents and allow them to become his subjects. Geraint then explains that the other dogkin heard about Diaz's domain from a member of their clan who is already living there. After hearing about the peaceful life in Diaz's territory, the other dogkin have decided that they also want to move there and live permanently. Diaz has no problem with the idea and says that he is willing to let them move in. However, he explains that he will first need to get approval from the rest of the village before making the final decision. Once everyone agrees, the dogkin will be allowed to move into the domain and become part of the community. Diaz tells the others about the dogkin who are interested in moving into his domain. The twins are especially excited about the idea of having dogs living with them, although Diaz reminds them that the decision has not been made for sure yet. After discussing that, Diaz tells Ulna that he wants to talk to her privately. The two of them step outside, and Ulna explains that the twins still refuse to tell her why they had a mouse sleeping in their bed. Diaz thinks they must have a good reason for keeping it a secret, so he tells Ulna that they should simply wait until the twins are ready to explain everything themselves. Ulna agrees that this is probably the best thing to do. Diaz then asks Ulna what she thinks about having more people become their subjects. Ulna agrees with the idea and seems to have no problem with allowing more people to join their growing community. Later, Eimer approaches Diaz, bows respectfully, and asks if she can stay and live in his domain. Diaz agrees, but he is curious about why she wants to stay here when she could simply return to Eldon's domain. Eimer explains that she wants to stay because she has grown attached to Ihan and Senai. She likes both of them and wants to remain by their side so she can help them grow and learn. She also explains that she can read and knows basic mathematics, so she would be able to work hard as their tutor and help educate them. Diaz looks toward Alna and asks for her opinion before making the final decision. Alna reluctantly agrees to let Eimer stay, but she gives her one condition: Eimer must make sure to maintain good hygiene. With everything settled, Diaz gives Geraint the message that he has decided to accept both the dogkin and Eimer into his domain. Geraint acknowledges the information before spreading his wings and flying away to deliver the news to Lord Eldon. Later that night, Diaz is suddenly woken up by Alna. She tells him that she can sense several visitors approaching their territory. The two of them quickly leave the village and head toward the valley to see who is coming. As they make their way there, Alna assumes the visitors must be the dogkin they have been expecting. She can clearly sense one large presence along with several smaller ones, which seems to match what they were told about the group. However, Diaz becomes confused when Alna mentions the large presence. He asks what she means by a large one, and when he looks up, he is completely shocked. The dogkin are not simply traveling toward the village. They are desperately running for their lives while being chased by a gigantic anaconda. Alna immediately reaches for her bow, intending to take down the giant snake, but she suddenly realizes that she left her bow back at home. Before either of them can do anything, the massive anaconda catches one of the dogkin in its jaws and lifts it off the ground. Seeing this, Diaz immediately rushes forward to save it. Despite being completely unarmed, Diaz manages to land a powerful strike directly on the anaconda's head, leaving the giant snake dazed. Taking advantage of the opening, he grabs the snake by the neck and strangles it until it finally stops moving. Alna immediately runs over to Diaz and scolds him for being reckless enough to rush into a dangerous battle without carrying any weapons. However, she quickly admits that she is just as responsible because she also came out there without bringing a weapon. Before they can say anything else, they suddenly suddenly hear a voice coming from inside the anaconda's mouth. The snake's mouth opens, revealing one of the dogkin that had been swallowed by the monster. The other dogkin immediately rush over and are relieved to see that he survived the attack. After making sure everyone is safe, a girl turned toward Diaz and Ulna and thanked them for saving their lives. In response, Diaz and Ulna simply bow before them and introduce themselves as the rulers of this domain. The girl is surprised to see their lord greeting them so respectfully. They quickly realize that coming to this place may have been the right decision after all, and they begin cheering and celebrating. She then introduces herself as Canis. She explains that she works for Lord Eldon as his caretaker and that she has been assigned to act as a guide during their visit. Canis then explains that there are 3 different clans among the dogkin who are hoping to migrate to Diaz's domain. The first group has dark fur and belongs to the Tybe Masti clan. Their clan leader steps forward and introduces himself as Marfi. The second group has brown fur and belongs to the Ba Senji clan. Their leader also steps forward and introduces himself as Sidorio. Finally, the group with black and white fur belongs to the Asun Shep clan. Their leader nervously steps forward and introduces himself as Shev. Canis then tells Diaz that the names of their clans are extremely important to the dogkin, so she asks him to do his best to remember them. Ulna then walks over to Diaz and informs him that she has appraised all 3 groups. She reveals that none of the dogkin showed any hostile tendencies. Diaz is surprised to hear this because he had expected there might be some people among them who could cause trouble. Canis then explains another important thing about the dogkin. They absolutely hate being left without anything to do. Because of this, she asks Diaz if there is any work he needs them to help with. Diaz immediately tells her that this will not be a problem because he can already think of plenty of jobs they could handle. Some of them could help build and maintain the cisterns, while others could assist with taking care of the cattle. Those who are not suited for those jobs could even serve the realm as soldiers. However, Canis doubts that the last idea will work. She explains that the dogkin have paws instead of hands, meaning they cannot properly hold or use weapons. Diaz understands her concern, but he does not give up on the idea. After learning that Canis will be staying in the domain for a while so she can report everything back to Lord Eldon, Diaz assures her that he will find a way to convince her. Shortly after, Diaz returns to the domain with everyone. Klaus happens to see them arriving and immediately becomes curious. He rushes over to Diaz, eager to find out who these new people are. Diaz introduces Klaus to Canis, and the moment Klaus lays eyes on her, he immediately falls for her. The others soon continue walking through the town so they can give the dogkin a proper tour of their new home. As they walk around, Ulna easily notices that Klaus has already developed feelings for Canis. 10 days later, the dogkin have settled in and are already doing a great job helping around the domain. Senai and Ihan have also started their own garden, and thanks to the help from the dogkin, the garden is already growing well. Meanwhile, some of the other dogkin have started combat training. Surprisingly, their training is going extremely well. They have already become strong enough to take Klaus down during their practice. Diaz watches the training and is amazed by their progress. He realizes just how impressive it is that the dogkin only needed 10 days to become strong enough to defeat someone as skilled as Klaus. After seeing their progress, Canis finally becomes convinced that the dogkin are capable of handling themselves in combat. Later, Diaz heads out to inspect the fields. While he is away, one of the dogkin accidentally sprains his ankle. Klaus immediately goes over and begins treating the injury. Canis also rushes over to help treat the injured dog. She is surprised to see that Klaus, despite being a human, did not hesitate for even a second to help one of the dogkin. Klaus simply tells her that their race does not matter to him. All that matters is that one of his comrades has been injured and needs help. Hearing this, Canis becomes slightly embarrassed and blushes. Meanwhile, in the Sansarive kingdom, Princess Diane enters a tomb with the intention of taking the scepter hidden inside. Her subordinates warn her that things could go badly if word gets out that she has been stealing treasures from tombs. Diane, however, isn't worried. She believes that no one will dare question her actions. She is still determined to take Diaz down, and she is convinced that possessing the scepter will give her enough power to accomplish it. Diane also plans to use the scepter to defeat her siblings and eventually take control of the entire kingdom for herself. Diane then tells Phrynetia that she has another secret weapon. She pulls out the king's seal and claims that with it, taking over the kingdom will be easy. However, Diane does not realize that everything happening is actually part of a manipulation tactic. Miser is secretly lurking outside the tomb and has been using Diane for his own purposes. He figures that if Diane manages to kill Diaz, he will finally have the chance to get his revenge. But if Diane is killed instead, he believes he will still accomplish something by proving himself and putting his father to shame. Later that evening, the royals gather together and discuss the fact that Diane has stolen both the scepter and the king's seal. They all consider her actions incredibly foolish and eventually turn to Prince Richard, asking what he plans to do next. Richard believes that it is best not to interfere with Diane. If they get involved, they risk encountering Diaz, and that is something Richard wants to avoid. The others are confused by this. They wonder why Diaz is considered such a serious threat. So Richard decides to explain his reasoning by telling them about Diaz's past. During the war, an order was given to slaughter the civilians of the enemy kingdom. However, Diaz refused to follow the order. Instead, he stopped his own soldiers from killing the civilians. In other words, Diaz has already shown that he is willing to directly defy the kingdom's orders if he believes those orders are wrong. Richard then brings up another part of Diaz's history. Diaz earned the nickname Ball Breaker because of an incident involving a military unit made up of noble sons who wanted to make a name for themselves. Young Miser happened to be part of that group. One day, Diaz walked in and found the group causing a girl trouble for a girl. He quickly tied all of them up and demanded to know why they were behaving that way. Miser explained that they had their eyes on a beautiful woman and wanted to pursue her. Diaz did not care about their excuse and simply kicked Miser directly his balls. Normally, Diaz should have been put on trial for attacking a noble like Miser. However, the king ultimately rewarded Diaz for refusing to stand by and allow the nobles to abuse their position. Because of that, the case against Diaz was dismissed. This is why Richard considers Diaz so dangerous. He is not someone who will blindly follow orders, even when those orders come directly from the kingdom. Everyone in the room learns about the ruthless but noble things Diaz has done in the past, and some of them even begin to admire him. Diaz played a crucial role in correcting many of the mistakes made during the war, so to the king. Diaz is nothing short of a hero. He even once saved the king's life. The nobles then wonder why Diaz was sent away without any money if he was supposedly so close to the emperor. Richard explains that a large amount of money had actually been allocated for Diaz, but Miser secretly stole it, leaving Diaz with nothing. Richard believes the kingdom will eventually fall if this kind of corruption continues. He drops some money onto the table and tells Nereus that his job is to bring Diane and the king's seal back before she gets the chance to make contact with Diaz. Richard then adds that if Nereus happens to encounter Diaz along the way, he should give Diaz half of the money. Richard assumes that Diaz must be struggling to survive without any proper funding. Meanwhile, Diane arrives at the Castek domain and bluntly tells Eldon that Diaz is a traitor. She announces that she has come to take Diaz down and confiscate all of his assets, and she asks Eldon to cooperate with her. Eldon is caught completely off guard by this claim. He immediately asks Diane if she has any evidence that Diaz is actually a traitor. Diane doesn't bother answering. Instead, she presents a royal decree that she created herself using the king's seal. The decree orders the Castek domain to cooperate with her and assist in taking Diaz down. Seeing the king's seal on the decree leaves Eldon completely shocked. Meanwhile, back at Diaz's domain, they have finally managed to get the cistern working properly. But just as they begin enjoying their progress, Geraint suddenly flies down and informs Diaz that something urgent has happened. Back at the Castek domain, Eldon and one of his colleagues carefully examine the royal decree. They can immediately tell that the document itself is fake. However, because it carries the king's seal, there is nothing they can officially do about it. Eldon tells everyone to stall for as long as possible. Some of the others assume Eldon only wants to delay Diane because he is friends with Diaz. But Eldon explains that this isn't simply about friendship. Diaz is out in the grasslands cultivating fields that nobody else has been able to use. What he is accomplishing could have a major impact on the entire region. After hearing this, the others immediately understand Eldon's position and agree with him. Just then, Geraint suddenly flies into the room carrying a response from Diaz. Eldon opens the letter and is completely shocked by what he reads. Diaz has instructed Eldon to cooperate with Diane exactly as the decree demands, and everyone is stunned by his decision. Meanwhile, Diaz and the others begin preparing themselves for what is coming. Canys is especially worried. She becomes emotional while talking to Klaus because she doesn't want him to go out and risk his life in the coming battle. Klaus reassures her and promises that he will come back to her. His words manage to lift Canys' spirits, even though she is still clearly worried. Finally, at the front of the domain, Diaz and Klaus look out at the approaching army. An enormous force led by Princess Diane is standing outside the domain, ready to charge. Diaz looks at the army and realizes that there is no turning back now. He figures that if they want a war, they're going to get one. Diaz admits the enemy's numbers are impressive, especially since all their side has is 10 masties led by Marf and Eimer. Klaus really wishes Eldon were fighting alongside them too, but Diaz says that even though Eldon has his doubts, Eldon wrote him a letter saying he should just do as planned, so none of this is Eldon's fault. Klaus then wonders why none of the Anakin, including Alnay, are here, and Diaz explains that he promised to keep the Anakin village hidden, and Alnay is the one in charge of keeping them all safe. In other words, how today turns out is now up to Diaz and Klaus alone. Diaz thinks to himself and realizes it would have been easy enough for the Anakin to rebuild their yurts and simply run across the plains to escape their enemies, but that would have meant giving up on the garden that Ihan and Senai worked so hard to build. As their lord, Diaz vows to protect them all, no matter what happens. The enemy then rings a war bell, and Diaz tells his comrades to get ready, since the enemy will come charging the moment the bell stops ringing. Their plan is simple. They will run around and lead the enemy into the pitfalls, find a way to split the enemy forces apart, and then strike Diane down with a sudden surprise attack. Diaz would honestly rather there be no killing at all today, but he knows there is no guarantee that things will stay that way. The enemy army suddenly charges toward them, and Diaz braces himself for the fight, but the army comes to a sudden, abrupt stop, confusing both Diaz and Klaus. Klaus looks through his telescope and realizes the soldiers were only running away from Diane at the center, splitting off into the left and right flanks instead. Diaz is genuinely confused as to what is going on, so he decides the best course of action is to simply wait and keep waiting until the enemy makes their next move. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, one of the knights runs up to Eldon and asks why he still has not ordered his forces to attack Diaz. Eldon calmly replies that he is honoring his father's dying wish, and that as a noble, he intends to properly observe his tea time. The knight finds this totally absurd, and not a worthy reason at all to disobey a royal decree. Eldon responds that he has already obeyed the decree by giving more than enough provisions, funds, and troops. Beyond that, Eldon adds, sending 1,000 men over to fight against just 2 mere opponents would be stooping far too low. Camelot then adds that if the knight insists, they will be willing to talk it over once tea time is finished, and hearing this only leaves the knight even more enraged. At the same time, the captain of the adventurers, Gordon, finally realizes why none of the other adventurers were willing to accept this job in the first place. He simply tells the others that they are leaving right now. They ask him why, especially since all they have to do is take down 2 men for such a huge payout. Gordon explains that if they go up against Diaz, every mercenary in the entire kingdom would turn against them, especially since Diaz saved so many of them during the war. The noble who hired them runs up to Gordon and demands to know why he and his men are not charging in. Gordon simply hands the payment back to the man and tells him that next time, he should reveal exactly who they are up against before the job even starts. Then he and his men walk off, watching through his telescope. Diaz is surprised to see the mercenaries walking away from the battlefield. He can also see that Eldon is busy stalling for time by having tea, and that Diane is clearly frustrated by all of it. Hearing this, Klaus realizes that all that remains now is the 50 troops stationed in the center, though it is clear they are lacking in both morale and real battle experience. Diaz feels confident they will win if they fight together, so he lets out a battle cry and charges forward at them alongside Klaus. Meanwhile, Alna is also watching everything unfold from a distance, and she figures that if Diaz refuses to raise a hand against Diane himself, then she will need to be the one to handle it herself. Out on the battlefield, Diaz gets to work and easily takes down several several troops using his battle spear, while Klaus also takes down a couple of soldiers on his own, driven by his desire to protect the people dear to him. After taking down roughly half of the enemy forces, Diaz realizes just how superb the Masties' movements have become through practice. It was Klaus who originally thought up the equipment for them to use in battle, and everything is going exactly as planned. Meanwhile, Eldon and Camelots continue watching the battle unfold from a distance, and Eldon asks Camelots what he thinks about the way Diaz fights. Camelots immediately points out that the most striking thing is Diaz's endless stamina and raw physical strength. But even with all that, it is clear he is still holding back a great deal. And it is also evident that Klaus functions perfectly as Diaz's right-hand man on the battlefield. This makes both of them realize that they may have underestimated Klaus and Diaz earlier. Meanwhile, Diane is busy crashing out because nothing is going according to plan. Then, all of a sudden, Diane narrowly escapes a barrage of arrows and becomes confused about where they came from. The arrows were actually being fired by Elnay and the other Dogkin, who are currently disguised and keeping themselves hidden. When the Dogkin ask Alna what they should do next, she explains that she plans to drive Diane deep into the eastern forest. So, the moment Diane starts running, Alna immediately chases after her with her bow in hand, determined to teach Diane a lesson and make sure she never thinks about interfering with Diaz's domain again. Diane eventually reaches the forest and narrowly manages to dodge the arrows Alna keeps firing at her. Alna knows it would be much faster to simply kill Diane, but she also knows Diaz would never approve of that. Because of this, she continues firing warning shots instead, making sure Diane understands that she is not welcome there. But then, several knights suddenly appear and apprehend Diane. They consider themselves lucky that Diaz hasn't already executed her and quickly take the king's seal away from her. They figure that their job is finished and prepare to leave. However, more of Alna's arrows suddenly fly toward them, leaving the knights confused about where the attacks are coming from. They assume the person firing the arrows must be one of Diaz's men. Nereus then explains that they are actually on Diaz's side as well. He pulls out a bag filled with gold coins that Prince Richard had allocated for Diaz and drops it onto the ground. He then explains that things would work out best for Diaz if they simply handed Diane over to Richard instead of keeping her there. Alna responds by shooting an arrow straight through the pouch, knocking it out of his hand. Nereus immediately agrees to let her have the gold, and the knights quickly run away. Alna walks over and picks up the pouch of gold coins. She figures that the man must be connected to the orphan that Diaz raised. Although her soul appraisal showed that his soul was white with a slight red tint, still, Alna decides not to worry about it for now. She will simply report everything that happened back to Diaz, and once everything is finally over, she figures she might as well give him a nice back massage. Meanwhile, Diaz and his comrades emerge victorious from the battle after their opponents surrender. Thankfully, there are only a few injuries and no deaths. Diaz is still disappointed that Diane managed to escape because he really wanted the chance to give her a piece of his mind. Eimer then walks over and starts biting Diaz's hair because he didn't follow her plan and use the pitfalls they had prepared. Diaz can only admit that it was his mistake. Soon after, Eldon walks over with a smile on his face and announces that he has come to surrender and discuss the release of the prisoners. Diaz sits down with Eldon to discuss the situation, but he is confused about why Eldon is surrendering when his army still has enough people to continue fighting. Eldon explains that they led an invading army directly into Diaz's territory, which is considered an act of aggression. On top of that, Diane has already fled, meaning the credibility of the royal decree that allowed the invasion has now been called into question. Because of all this, Eldon believes that they have no choice but to surrender and try to negotiate a peaceful solution. Diaz understands his reasoning and agrees to Eldon's proposal for peace. Just then, Alna arrives and explains that she was busy chasing after Diane, and along the way she came across a messenger from a child Diaz once raised, named Richard. Eldon is left in complete shock the moment he hears that name. Alna was told that Richard would be the one to pass judgment on Diane, and that he had also sent this money over to him. Diaz is glad to hear that, though Eldon is busy cooking up a plan realizing Richard's involvement. By sundown, Diaz drags the carriage back home, and Alna points out that the Illic Wives Club is making it much easier for them to haul all the spoils back. The reparation goods from Eldon mean they now have even more to carry, so they really appreciate the extra extra help. That said, Diaz recalls that he had originally asked Elna to stay behind so she could hide the entire village, and Elna reminds him that she did tell him about the Iluk wives being out there on the battlefield too. She starts to get a little angry, realizing he had simply agreed to it all without even thinking it through properly. They arrive back home shortly after, and the twins run straight into Diaz's arms, while Canis runs right over to Klaus for a hug, thanking him for coming back safe. Elna watches them hugging from a distance and quietly confirms to herself that the two of them are now officially together. Then Diaz notices a strange rod that one of the dogs is holding, and after he picks it up, Elna can sense that some kind of magical energy is coming from it. She decides to test it out by adding a bit of her own magic to it, but nothing happens at all. Diaz then holds the rod himself, and it gives him a familiar note, the very same feeling he gets whenever he holds his battle axe. The rod suddenly activates and releases a wide stream of fire, catching absolutely everyone off guard. Meanwhile, at the royal capital, Prince Miser is furious at how the noble has now failed to take out Diaz 3 separate times. The noble begs Miser for one last chance, but Miser flatly refuses, and the guards come in to drag him out while he desperately tries to resist. Later, Prince Richard holds a meeting with the other nobles, informing them that Diane has incurred the king's wrath and has since been confined to the temple. Miser also managed to deflect all blame for stealing the money meant for Diaz by pinning the crime on a noble within his own faction. So even though he personally escaped direct punishment, his entire faction has still collapsed as a result. Hearing all this, everyone realizes it pushes Richard one step closer to becoming king. But hearing that actually puts Richard in a rather bad mood, so he simply storms right out of the room. Marius wonders what could have put Richard in such a bad mood. Child explains that in this whole dilemma, it appears Prince Richard is the sole winner on the surface, but the true victor is actually Eldon. When Eldon had his audience with the king, he directly asked for a 3-year tax break for both his own territory and Diaz's territory as well. The king agreed, since after all, he was the one who erred in this whole situation by allowing the seal to leave his presence in the first place. Castex basically controls the entire western trade route, so if they pay no taxes for 3 whole years, it will significantly strengthen their position, and he figures that is a problem they simply cannot afford to ignore. Nereus points out that it was Eldon who exposed Miser in the first place, and the king clearly adores Diaz, so it would not make much sense for the king to refuse the request. On top of that, Eldon even suggested that Prince Richard would be a perfect fit as the next king, and the king greatly admires that kind of behavior from Eldon. Now that it has come to this, Schild figures it will be very difficult to get the king to revoke the tax exemption, since he can hardly go undercutting his own loyal supporter. With all that said, it makes perfect sense why Prince Richard is so annoyed by the whole situation. Nereus is honestly quite impressed with how well Eldon is playing this whole game, despite being so young. But putting that aside, Nereus recalls that they have been able to recover the king's seal, but still have no idea where the scepter itself might be. The scepter is then seen being used in Diaz's household as nothing more than a simple fire starter. That was episode 8. Subscribe to not miss the next part and watch the next video on screen.